So moving on to part 2 of our biomechanics unit. So looking at force, which includes internal, external force, motion, which creates momentum, and force summation. So we're here looking at 3 sub-concepts with the fundamentals of biomechanics. So force can be internal or external, can be push or pull. Motion can be a person and or object, and momentum is the mass of a body times by the velocity it's moving at. So a force being a push or pull that alters or tends to alter the state of motion of a body. So what happens is it changes the state of the motion, direction, and the velocity of the body. So internal forces, they occur when the system of bones, muscles, tendons, and ligaments act on one another. And the external forces are the forces that are exerted from outside the body, so gravity or by contact with some other body part. So we can see by looking at the diagram on the left, apart from the type of club I've used and the technical skill that I have, how do I hit the ball as far as possible? So what we need to consider is swinging harder by applying greater internal force. So the harder or more force we generate through our muscles, we can generate through that external object and hit the ball harder. So we often produce sporting movements such as a golf swing. Multiple forces are being applied within the body from multiple parts. So the concept of force summation involves the individual forces that produce successive movements, and they being added to create a larger total force. So any movement is a combination of a multiple of forces. So whether it's a sequential movement or it's used to produce optimal velocity, each segment should be moved at the instant the previous segment begins to slow down. So we'll get into some examples here. Question here was Charles Barkley, his golf swing, whether it was a smooth, does it have good sequential force summation? We could see with the pause in his golf swing that he wasn't allow the movement and the contraction and relaxation of muscles to come and have good sequential force summation through the ball. The second example we'll have a look at is Ricky Ponting. If we had appropriate force summation with a cricket shot, we should be able to step into the ball and have our limbs move into the ball to create a strong platform with our body and bat. And we'll just see. So we can see with Ricky Ponting, we'll see on the replay.
He loves this ground, but not today. Oh, what beauty. He squares Ponting up, the ball swings enough to miss the bat, and just...
So we can see here he's stepping forward, so we have good force summation here.
Just enough to clip.
But you can see here that his body is falling over the ball, and therefore when we're moving away here and down, our force summation has not allowed him to have a stable platform. There his bat was not on the line and his balance has been lost.
Wow.
Causing him to fall over and be dismissed. So if we look at the questions here, Charles Barkley does not have good force summation. So he doesn't allow the golf club to swing. We can see that by knowing normal golf swing. He is not going to have the most successful golf sort of execution of that shot by that swing there. Second question is Ricky Ponting. Look at his first in dismissal. Can we link the failure to poor force summation? Yes, we can. In this example, the summation of forces was not sequential. All body parts were moving simultaneously rather than in sequence, where the larger lower body parts should stabilise and transfer force into the upper body. The lack of stability of the lower body parts and the incorrect sequencing of body parts also resulted in losing balance. So we can see here an example of sequencing force summation of throwing it of a tennis ball. So we'd have our large torso, our legs, which would go into our torso, which would go into our shoulders, which would go into our arms, which would then go into our small fingers. So if we have these two images of students playing an overhead clear in badminton, so good force summation we can see here. We have a twist at the torso, we have stepping into the shot, then we have balanced, hitting at the highest point here, and we have a nice follow through. So we've generated power from our large muscle groups, and we have our control around our small muscle groups, where here we are just isolating everything here. So we are not utilizing these major muscle groups through the body. Therefore, the first player would have a greater force because they have utilized all major muscle groups. So player 1 is producing the better overhead clear, generates greater force as a result of effective force summation. We'll be doing pracs that show force summation, particularly with the softball throw and things like that. So that will be another good learning point. All right, so momentum. So we know that once force is applied to the body, we can create motion. So once a body or anything is mass is in motion, it has momentum. So momentum equals mass times by velocity. So momentum is a quantity of motion of body is equal to the product of body's mass and velocity. So is particularly important in impact sports because the result of impact depends very largely on the momentum possessed by each of the body. So ideally, we're looking at mass times by velocity. So if two people can move at the same velocity, if one person has a greater mass, they will generate greater momentum. We'll have a look at a video clip here. So we can see the momentum generated by the tackler with appropriate tackling technique, but the heavier they are with appropriate velocity can generate that momentum and create particularly high force. Even that example there with the smaller player. So rugby is a really good example of how the heavier the person are, if keeping the velocity at the same rate, we can generate lots more momentum and therefore force into the tackle. So same principle here. So if a 100-kilo man can run 100 meters in 13 seconds, what would the velocity be? All right, so we can figure that out here, and we can see how as the mass gets lower, the momentum will get lower. So we can see there. So the law of conservation of momentum, when an object is moving, it has momentum. As long as there's no force applied to speed it up or slow it down, the momentum is said to be conserved. So true conservation of momentum is conserved only in theory, as most cases there are external factors, e.g. air resistance and gravity. So in collision situations, that is between players where implement strikes a ball, the principle of conservation of momentum applies. Just nip through here. All right, impulse. So impulse is another principle related to momentum and forces. So the impulse of a force is equal to the change of momentum it produces. So impulse refers to how long a force is applied to it for. So force times by the amount of force is applied for equals impulse. So you got to consider when you have say a baseball bat here and a ball, the impulse is the amount of time that the ball is in contact with the bat for. All right. So obviously, with objects like tennis rackets that might have a give in the string, or a flex, an object that might have a flex in the shaft, like a golf club, that will increase a longer time where there's impulse, and the longer the force is applied, the greater the change in momentum can occur. So we want to try and maximize the time that ball is spent up against that bat. So that's where we have like a follow through is so important, because if we stop when the bat's against the ball, we just have that small time when the ball ricochets off the bat. But if we can follow through the bat with the ball, then there's going to be a longer time here where the ball is actually in impulse, which means we get greater power. So that's when we can say, like, instead of a standing throw, the spinning throw, we can generate more impulse the amount of time the forces are being applied to the disc. Therefore, we can transfer that force and that momentum through the disc. So more often than not, the human body doesn't allow us to maximise both force and time. Instead, we can generally only change one of these factors. So, for example, in a hockey hit, we can accelerate the ball with great force, but the stick only remains in contact with the ball for a split second. So that's that impulse. Our other option is to accelerate the ball, is to play the flick. So in case we exert less force, but we increase the impulse time. So the slap shot, so less impulse, the flick hit, less force, but more impulse. Alternatively to this, there's times that we need to decrease the momentum of an object. So a good example is when we have a hard ball, like in cricket, where we have to absorb the momentum, all right, and take the ball in. So impact is another principle we discuss in relation to momentum, particularly in collision situations. So we're looking at the table below, provide examples for the different types of collisions. So we have collisions between projectiles and implements, which are like tennis serves, with tee shots in golf, where we have human bodies impacting with projectiles, so football hand pass, volleyball spike. We have human body impacting with different playing surfaces, so diving into a pool or trampolining. And we have human body colliding with other bodies, so football bump and rugby tackle. So impact is when two bodies collide, they can remain either in contact or bounce apart. So when they become one body, so like a shot put embedding in a soggy ground, the impact is said to be inelastic. When the bodies are first deformed and then due to the spring nature of materials, when they're made, they're restored to the original shape and then are said to be elastic. So we also have elastic type implements, so like a tennis ball, a golf ball, they have elasticity in them, and they allow for impact. So we can see here these. So we can see playing surface composition of the ball, the temperature, the striking implement, and the speed of the implement. They will have impact effects on impact. All right. We can nip through this. All right. So what we need to do is 7.3, summation of forces, direction and impact. So read and answer questions there, those 10 pages.